The sound of wind scraping tree branches across the tin roof jolted Julie Bennett awake. She gasped, sitting up fast. Too fast. A wave of nausea spun her head and sent pain shooting through her skull. Her hands instinctively clutched the coarse wool blanket covering her as she looked around. The cabin was unfamiliar, rustic, single-roomed, with dust dancing and the slats of morning light slicing through boarded windows. Her mouth tasted of blood. Her clothes were torn and damp, her feet bare, blistered. A metal basin near the door reeked of rubbing alcohol. The only sign of life was a half-burned candle and an empty tea mug crusted with dried herbs. She stumbled outside, legs trembling beneath her. The woods were cold and quiet, the ground muddy from recent rain. Julie had no idea where she was, no memory of arriving here. The last thing she remembered was nothing concrete. Vague images, an argument, a staircase, blue lights. It took her nearly 4 hours of aimless walking to reach the road. Another 2 to hitch a ride from a skeptical farmer who dropped her on the edge of her hometown, Crestwood. Julie expected relief. Instead, a creeping unease gripped her as she walked through her neighborhood. No one noticed her. Or worse, people she'd known for years looked straight through her, their eyes distant and blank. Had something happened while she was gone? She turned the corner onto the street where she lived and froze. Cars were lined up outside her family church. Black suits, dark dresses, faces streaked with tears. A large framed photo rested on an easel at the entrance. It was her. Julie's breath caught in her throat. Her hands shook as she inched closer, sticking to the shadows. She saw her name in swirling gold letters beneath the photo, in loving memory of Julie Bennett, 1979 to 2023. She felt her knees weaken. The air around her thickened with dread. People were crying, some genuinely. Others seemed almost relieved. She crept closer and peered into the open doors of the church. Inside, her husband Mark stood at the altar, speaking in a solemn voice. Her sister Angela clutched his arm, tears glistening as she leaned into him like a grieving widow. Ethan, her son, sat in the front pew, head bowed. But even from a distance, Julie could see his hands weren't shaking. He wasn't crying. Everything was too polished, too rehearsed. Julie's body went cold. She pressed herself against the brick wall, hidden by a tree, just in time to see a man in a suit hand Mark a folder and a silver briefcase. Julie recognized the logo, Westgate Insurance. Mark signed something with a shaky pen. Angela kissed his cheek. The man handed Mark the briefcase. Mark opened it just enough to glance inside. He didn't smile, but there was a flicker of satisfaction in his eyes. Julie's name was on that check. She just knew it. She stumbled away from the church, nearly vomiting behind a bench at the park. The reality slammed into her. They thought she was dead. Or they wanted her to be. Her family. Her blood. Her home. And someone had been paid for it. Back in the shadows of the trees, she crouched down and gripped her stomach to hold in the scream building in her chest. What kind of death had they claimed? A car crash? A fall? No one had filed a missing person report, at least not one that reached the police. She would have been flagged, right? Or maybe someone had made sure she wasn't. The sun dipped behind clouds, casting long shadows over Crestwood. Julie no longer felt like she belonged here. She felt like a ghost drifting through a world that had already buried her. She needed answers, but first, she needed to stay invisible. She slipped back toward the street, blending into the crowd as mourners exited. No one gave her a second glance. A woman wept into a tissue as she told a friend, "Mark held up so well. I just can't believe it. Poor Julie. Such a kind soul." Kind soul? Julie bit down a bitter laugh. If they thought she was so kind, why had no one come looking for her? Why had her husband signed away her life for a check? And then, as she was about to retreat, she saw it. Angela, alone by the church steps, dabbing her eyes with a silk handkerchief. She wasn't crying anymore. Instead, she whispered into her phone, "Yes, It's done. Tell him the funds are secured. We can move forward. Julie didn't know who him was, not yet, but she knew one thing. Someone had orchestrated this. Someone powerful. And they weren't finished. But neither was she. Julie vanished into the trees as quickly as she had come. She had been buried, erased, replaced, but she was still alive. And she was going to find out why. Night had fallen by the time Julie crept toward her old neighborhood, her breath fogging in the cold spring air. She wore a hoodie she'd found discarded behind a thrift store and kept her face low, her once familiar street now a battlefield. Every porch light flickering to life sent her ducking behind bushes. Every passing car felt like a threat. From across the street, she stared at her own home, at least, what used to be hers. The curtains had changed, her hydrangeas were overgrown. Her welcome mat was gone, replaced with one that read, "Bless this home," in Angela's unmistakably gaudy handwriting. Julie felt her chest tighten. Inside, silhouettes moved behind the living room blinds. She watched as Mark poured wine into 2 glasses and handed one to Angela. They clinked in a mockery of celebration. Julie caught herself clenching her fists. Then something worse. Angela curled up beside him on the couch, her head resting on his shoulder as if she had always belonged there. Julie's mouth went dry. Her stomach churned. She crept around back, knowing every blind spot in the property. The shed was still unlocked, the old key still duct-taped beneath the compost bin where she'd hidden it years ago. She slipped inside the house through the basement door as silently as a shadow. Upstairs, the TV played a murder mystery. Their laughter drifted faintly down the hall. Angela's laugh, sharp and shrill, paired with Mark's low chuckle. Julie wanted to scream. Instead, she tiptoed toward the guest bedroom. Everything inside had changed. Her framed photos were gone. Her bookshelves were empty. The walls, once adorned with family portraits, now displayed Angela's live, laugh, love decor. Julie turned to the closet. Inside, her clothes were crammed into a single box labeled "Donate." Her favorite scarf, hand-knit by her late grandmother, was crumpled on top, its thread unraveling. She held it for a moment, heart pounding, then dropped it. She checked the dresser drawer where she used to keep important documents. Empty. Her fingers moved with quiet urgency. She slid beneath the bed, where a loose floorboard had once hidden her emergency file. Passports, bank codes, backup cash, gone. Julie backed out of the room slowly, returning to the kitchen. That's when she noticed the mail stack on the counter. She scanned quickly, and her pulse jumped. Her bank! Her name! A closed account notice, dated just 2 weeks ago. They'd drained her finances. She took a photo of the notice with a burner phone she'd picked up from a truck stop. Before she could retreat, she heard footsteps. Mark's voice floated into the hallway. "I'll get another bottle." Julie dove behind the pantry just as he entered the kitchen. He walked right past her, humming, oblivious. Her eyes narrowed. She used to love that hum. Now it sounded like rot. She slipped back outside just before he returned. From the backyard, she saw the flicker of her son's bedroom light turn on upstairs. Ethan. She scaled the side fence and ducked behind the hedge outside his window. She peeked inside. He was on his phone, tense, shoulders hunched, whispering. "I said I don't want to do this anymore. Yeah, but I didn't think it'd go this far." Julie's heart stuttered. He listened, then hung up and opened his drawer. He pulled out a manila envelope and shoved it into his backpack, glancing around nervously. Julie pressed her hand to the glass, wishing he could somehow feel it. She waited until his light went off. Then she followed. The next morning, from the bus stop across the street, Julie trailed Ethan downtown to a rundown building near the industrial district. He disappeared inside. Julie waited, crouching behind a vending machine in the alley. 20 minutes later, he came back out, without the envelope. Julie crept inside. A rusted sign above the door read, "Cross Holdings, Private Office, Cross." The name jolted something loose inside her. Wasn't that the same developer from the cabin property record? Julie took a picture of the sign and slipped out. Her son had delivered something, documents? To the man connected to the cabin where she'd woken up. Her pulse raced. What had Ethan gotten tangled in? Back at her motel, she opened her burner laptop and scoured everything she could find. Cross Holdings was linked to multiple aliases, tax fraud allegations, and suspicious real estate acquisitions, including the cabin. A chilling pattern formed. Julie hadn't just been replaced. She had been erased, with precision. And the people doing it weren't sloppy amateurs. They were professionals. Mark, Angela, Ethan, Cross. Julie realized then, this wasn't just about a payout. It was a long game. And she had no idea how deep the lies went. Julie Bennett had always believed in truth. She'd been a librarian, a woman of order, of logic. Facts mattered, footnotes meant something. But now, all the facts around her were lies. She stood in the hallway of her sister Angela's apartment building, breathing slow and silent. The place was eerily quiet. It smelled like too much lavender and desperation. Julie had picked the lock, something she never thought she'd learn how to do, but she'd had time to practice. Desperation taught fast. Angela's apartment looked lived in, but not chaotic. 2 wine glasses in the sink, a pair of heels kicked under the coffee table. Julie moved through the rooms like a phantom, heart pounding with every step. In Angela's home office, once used for her failing social media consultancy, Julie found something that made her stop cold. Medical records, dozens of them. And every single one bore Julie's name. She picked up the top file. It listed Julie as terminal, an aggressive neurological disease, early onset dementia, evidenced by delusional episodes and memory gaps. Julie staggered back. She had never seen a real doctor for memory issues, only that one man, Dr. Nolan Price. The charming psychiatrist Angela had insisted she see after Julie had briefly lost time last year following a stress-induced fainting spell. She flipped through the forms. All were printed, notarized, signed. The problem was, they weren't in her handwriting. Angela had forged her medical history, fabricated an illness, created a paper trail that made Julie's death not just believable, but expected. And Mark? He hadn't hesitated. She checked the date of the last hospital visit. The very next day, he had filed a life insurance claim. Julie photographed every page with shaking fingers. She was still reeling when she heard the ding of a phone. Angela's tablet lit up on the kitchen counter. The screen preview showed a text. Mark, Ethan got another envelope. Can't keep stalling. Cross wants the rest by Friday. Julie's blood turned to ice. Ethan. Her son. Her sweet, soft-spoken Ethan was involved. She pocketed the tablet and fled before Angela came back. Outside in the alley, under the harsh hum of a flickering streetlight, Julie stared at the text. Ethan had been receiving envelopes, delivering them. She had seen it with her own eyes. But now it was confirmed. He wasn't just keeping secrets. He was an active part of the plan. At least, that's what it looked like. Back at the motel, Julie hacked into Ethan's email account using his childhood password, his dog's name Baxter, followed by her birthday. She hated herself for doing it, but love didn't mean blindness anymore. What she found made her stomach twist. Encrypted messages. Dozens, sent from burner accounts. Most were gibberish, but a few had file attachments, scanned copies of handwritten documents, some with her signature, none familiar. And then came the smoking gun. A surveillance photo of Julie at the cabin, unconscious. She stared at it, numb. Someone had documented her disappearance, photographed her drugged and staged. It wasn't just that they hadn't looked for her, they had planned for her to go missing. And now Ethan was acting as courier between Mark and some unknown recipient. Julie needed to see him. To look him in the eye. The next afternoon, she waited outside his school in a borrowed hat and oversized sunglasses. When he came out, hunched under the weight of his backpack, she followed him quietly until he ducked into the old library she used to volunteer at. That was unexpected. Inside, Julie hid behind a shelf as she watched him meet a stranger, a tall woman with sharp features, sunglasses indoors, and a phone in one hand the entire time. They exchanged no words. Ethan handed her an envelope. She handed him a USB stick. Julie slipped out and trailed the woman on foot. She took her to a parking garage and snapped a picture of the license plate before the car disappeared into traffic. Julie would run it later, but the name Cross echoed in her mind again. Every road pointed to him. Back at her motel, a knock startled her. No one knew she was here. No one should. She froze, waited. The knock came again, followed by footsteps retreating. Julie opened the door a crack. No one was there, only a padded envelope. Inside, one of the forged medical files, burned around the edges, and a note written in shaky block letters. "You were part of this. You asked for it. Don't look too hard." Julie sat back, breath gone. This wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was gaslighting on a surgical level. And someone wanted her to question her own memory again. But Julie was done doubting herself. She wasn't crazy, she wasn't dead. And she was going to burn their whole web of lies to the ground. Julie's hands trembled as she approached the secluded cabin once again. The memory of waking up there, dazed, confused, and utterly alone, still haunted her. But this time, she wasn't a victim, she was a hunter. The cabin stood half-hidden beneath towering pines, shrouded in a thick fog that twisted like a ghost around the weathered wood. The chill in the air bit through her jacket as she stepped cautiously across the muddy yard. She circled the perimeter, her eyes scanning for anything out of place. Then, near the back porch, she spotted it, a faint glimmer beneath the cracked floorboards. Kneeling, she pried up the loose plank and revealed a heavy steel safe, rusted but locked tight. Heart hammering, she pulled out the small crowbar she'd borrowed from an old handyman in town and began working on the lock. Minutes passed like hours, the tension in her shoulders growing unbearable. Then, click. Inside the safe lay a thick folder bound with a rubber band. Julie peeled it open and pulled out a stack of documents stamped with official seals and watermarks. Names and dates blurred together, but one name stood out like a scar. Darren Cross, the same man linked to the cabin's recent purchase. As Julie flipped through the papers, the truth spilled out. Cross was no ordinary developer. He was a kingpin in a shadowy world of offshore companies, shell corporations, and illegal land grabs. The cabin had been bought with laundered money just weeks before her disappearance. But why? Her eyes scanned for any clue tying Cross to her family. Then she found it, a series of emails, cryptic, terse, between Cross and Mark Bennett. Deadline approaching. She can't reappear. Ethan is cooperative but growing restless. Angela secured the false documents. Keep pressure on. Julie's blood ran cold. Mark wasn't just cashing in on her supposed death. He was working with Cross, a man whose influence reached into every dark corner of the city and beyond. Suddenly, a noise shattered the silence, branches snapping behind the cabin. Julie spun, heart pounding. A figure emerged from the trees. Mark. His face was harder than she remembered, eyes sharp and calculating. "Julie," he said calmly, voice almost cold. "You shouldn't be here." "Why, Mark?" she demanded. "Why drag that man into this? Why risk everything?" Mark smiled, a cruel, bitter twist of lips. "You think this is about money? This is about control. About erasing the past so we can build something new. Without you." Julie's mind raced. She remembered the letter from her mother, the fake diagnosis, the forged hospital records. Everything was a meticulously crafted trap, and she had walked right into it. Mark took a step closer. "You were supposed to be gone. Forever. But now, you're a liability." Julie's eyes darted to the trees. She could run, but where? She was alone, hunted by her own family and a ruthless criminal. Then Mark's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, frowning. Cross was calling. Mark answered, his tone shifting to business. "Problem," Mark said quietly. "She's here." Julie realized this was no coincidence. Cross must have known, or suspected, she'd return. Mark hung up, turning back to her. "You should leave," he warned, "before this gets ugly." But Julie's resolve hardened. "I'm not leaving, not until I find out who you really are, and what you want from me." Mark's eyes darkened. "You want the truth? It's that you never really left. You chose this, chose to disappear, and now you're paying for it." Julie's breath caught. Could it be true? Had she, in some fog of memory loss, agreed to this? The pieces still didn't fit. Suddenly, a gunshot cracked through the silence. Julie dove behind the cabin as Mark fired toward the woods, yelling into his phone, "She's here! Don't let her slip away!" The hunt had begun again. But this time, Julie wasn't just running, she was fighting back. Julie sat in the dim light of a cheap roadside motel, her hands trembling as she replayed the surveillance footage over and over on her borrowed tablet. The grainy black and white images showed two figures meeting in the shadowed parking lot of a dingy motel, Mark and Angela. Their conversation was hushed, but the unmistakable tenderness, the stolen glances, the way their hands briefly touched, told a story Julie had never dared to imagine. Mark, her husband, and Angela, her sister, were not only betraying her trust, they were betraying everything she thought she knew about family. Her stomach churned as the pieces fell into place. The forged medical records, the hastily filed insurance claim, the strange closeness she'd sensed between them since her disappearance. But there was more. Hidden beneath the footage was an old VHS tape labeled Angela's Attempt. Julie's heart pounded as she loaded it. The grainy video showed Angela, looking younger and desperate, confronting Julie with a prescription bottle in hand. "You don't know how to keep your life together," Angela hissed. "If you keep messing up, I'll make sure they lock you away. You'll never see Ethan again." Julie's breath caught. Angela had tried to frame her for prescription fraud, had almost gotten her committed to a psychiatric facility. The realization hit like a punch to the gut. Angela's betrayal wasn't just recent, it was years in the making. Fueled by a mix of fury and pain, Julie decided to confront Angela, but not as herself. She disguised her appearance with a wig and glasses and went to Angela's favorite cafe. Angela was there, chatting with friends, laughing easily. Julie approached cautiously. "Angela," she said softly, watching her sister's expression shift. Angela's eyes narrowed, suspicion flickering. "You think you can hide everything, don't you?" Julie said, voice steady but cold. "But I know." Angela's defenses cracked for a moment, and she muttered under her breath, "You knew." Julie froze. "Knew what?" she pressed. Angela's face twisted with guilt and fear. "You knew about the plan before it happened," she whispered. "You were part of this. You agreed to disappear." Julie's mind reeled. How could that be? She had no memory of any such agreement. Was her past darker than she realized? Had she truly consented to this charade, then forgotten everything? Angela's confession opened a new wound, but it also gave Julie something to fight for: the truth. Before Julie could press further, Angela's phone buzzed. She glanced at it nervously and excused herself, leaving Julie alone with her swirling thoughts. The web of lies was tightening, but Julie was determined to untangle every thread. Julie's pulse quickened as she stood outside the address scribbled on an old appointment card she'd found buried in Angela's files. Dr. Nolan Price, the psychiatrist who supposedly treated her. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the door handle of the small brick office building nestled on a quiet city street. But when the door creaked open, the waiting room was empty. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light filtering through cracked blinds. The walls were bare, save for one faded diploma with the name Nolan Price, M.D., printed on it. Yet the office was eerily silent, abandoned. Confused and unsettled, Julie wandered through the space. Her eyes caught the remnants of files scattered on a desk. Manila folders, prescription pads, notes written in neat, clinical handwriting. But there was something off. None of the files matched her name. As Julie sifted through the papers, a chill crept over her. The signature on the prescription pads didn't match the scrawled signature on her forged medical records, and the license on the wall looked suspiciously outdated. Her breath caught when she found an envelope addressed to the Department of Health Licensing. Inside was a letter. Notice of revocation of medical license, Dr. Nolan Price. The date? Nearly 2 years ago. And the reason? Fraudulent activity and practicing without a license. She was stunned. The man who diagnosed her with a terminal illness, prescribed medications, and managed her treatment didn't legally exist anymore? Or worse, maybe never did. Julie's mind raced. If Nolan Price was a fraud, who had been behind her treatment? Who had been giving her those drugs and convincing her she was sick? Determined to find answers, she tracked down a former nurse who had worked with the doctor, a fragile woman named Claire, who now lived in a rundown trailer park on the city's edge. Claire was reluctant to talk at first, wringing her hands nervously as Julie explained who she was and why she was searching for the truth. Finally, Claire's resolve broke. "You were never really sick," she whispered, eyes darting around. "It was all part of a plan. The treatments, the meds, they were experimental, designed to erase your memories, make you forget." Julie felt her stomach drop. Claire went on. "You signed consent forms, documents authorizing an, quote, experimental financial reset. You agreed to disappear from your life, to reset everything. But the memory suppression was supposed to be temporary. Something went wrong." "Who made you do it?" Julie demanded. Claire hesitated. "Someone close to you. Someone who wanted control over your life and your money." Her heart pounded. She thought of Mark, Angela, even Ethan. Claire handed Julie a folder with copies of the original consent forms, signed in her name, but the signature was shaky, almost like a forgery. As Julie pored over the papers, a sudden knock at the trailer door startled them both. Claire's face turned pale. "It's them," she said. "They're coming for the files." Julie's instinct screamed at her to run, but she knew she had to hold on. She grabbed the documents and stuffed them into her bag just as the door burst open. 2 men in suits entered, flashing badges. "We're with the Department of Health," one announced. "We need those files." Julie's heart hammered, but she refused to give up the evidence. As the men advanced, Claire slipped out the back door, disappearing into the trees. Left alone, Julie faced the men with a steady gaze. "Do you know what you're really protecting?" she asked. "Or are you just pawns?" The men hesitated, then backed down, leaving her with a warning. "Stay out of this." As the door slammed shut, Julie realized the truth was bigger than she imagined. A conspiracy involving forged documents, fake doctors, and memory-altering drugs. But the question remained. Had she been a victim or a willing participant in her own disappearance? Julie sat alone in the dim light of her rented motel room, the envelope trembling in her hands. It was thick, yellowed with age, and postmarked 3 months ago, long before anyone even knew she was alive. With a deep breath, she carefully opened the letter. The handwriting was elegant but unfamiliar. "Dear Julie, if you are reading this, then the world as you knew it has changed. I'm sorry for the years lost between us, but some truths must wait for the right moment. I am your mother. You were never told because I wanted to protect you from a dangerous legacy, one tied to wealth, power, and secrets that could destroy us both. You stand to inherit a fortune, millions in assets and land that have been kept hidden to shield you from those who would use you or hurt you. But the inheritance is conditional. It belongs to you or your next of kin if you are declared deceased. Beware those who seek to erase you. Trust no one. Julie's breath caught. Her mother, the woman she thought was dead, was alive, or at least had been alive until recently, and this inheritance was no small matter. It explained everything. The sudden insurance claim, the careful erasure of her life, the involvement of powerful figures like Darren Cross. But the timing. Why had this letter been sent months ago? Why hadn't she received it before? She rifled through the envelope and found a sealed packet of legal documents. Wills, trusts, power of attorney forms, marked with her mother's signature. And then, a photograph. Her mother standing with a man Julie recognized immediately, Darren Cross. Julie's mind raced. Cross wasn't just a shadowy developer, he was entwined with her family's deepest secrets. The letter's warning echoed in her ears. Trust no one. Suddenly, her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. We know you're alive. Stop digging or you'll lose everything. Her fingers froze over the screen. The threats were escalating. But Julie's resolve only strengthened. She wasn't just fighting to reclaim her life. She was fighting for a legacy that had been stolen from her. The next morning, Julie returned to town, determined to access her mother's estate records at the county courthouse. She slipped inside the grand old building, heart pounding as she requested the files. What she uncovered was staggering, a web of transfers and trusts designed to funnel her inheritance through layers of shell companies, all controlled by Darren Cross. And then, buried in the fine print of one document, she found it. A clause specifying that if Julie was declared legally dead, the estate would pass directly to Mark Bennett, her husband. Everything made sense now. Mark's motivation wasn't just greed. It was desperation. By faking her death, he stood to gain not only the insurance payout, but also control over her mother's fortune. But the biggest shock came when she dug deeper into the estate's history. The property had been in her mother's family for generations, but a mysterious fire had destroyed much of the original paperwork years ago. And the last surviving document hinted at something else. An unregistered heir. Could that heir be Ethan? Or someone else entirely? Julie's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden crash outside the courthouse. She rushed to the window just in time to see a black SUV speeding away, its license plate obscured. Someone was watching her. Back at the motel, Julie pored over every document again, the pieces swirling into a deadly puzzle. Her mother's letter had opened a door, revealing the true depth of the conspiracy against her. Now, with enemies closing in and trust shattered, Julie faced a terrifying question. How far would her family, and their dangerous allies, go to keep her silent? And could she uncover the final truth before it was too late? Julie stood in the grand ballroom of the Cross Foundation Gala, hidden in plain sight beneath a black lace mask. The room shimmered with glittering chandeliers and champagne flutes, but beneath the opulence, the rot was thick. Darren Cross, her would-be eraser, stood at the podium smiling for the cameras. Angela, radiant in emerald silk, clung to Mark's arm like a trophy. And Ethan. Ethan sat alone near the back, his shoulders hunched in guilt. Julie's heartbeat thundered in her ears as she clutched the flash drive in her hand. It contained everything. The forged medical files, the fake psychiatrist's credentials, the affair between her husband and sister, and, most damning, the financial documents linking Darren Cross to the manipulation of her mother's estate. This was the moment she'd waited for. But revenge had to be surgical. She slipped through the crowd, unnoticed, and approached the AV booth. The technician barely looked up as she passed him a note and the flash drive. It was enough. 5 minutes. She stepped back into the crowd and locked eyes with Ethan. His lips parted in shock as he recognized her. She nodded, once. He stood abruptly and crossed the room, weaving through donors and society elites. "Mom?" he whispered, his voice raw. "You're alive?" Julie nodded again. "We need to talk. After this." Ethan's eyes filled with tears. I didn't mean to help them. They said you were dead. And when I found out you weren't..." They threatened to hurt me if I told anyone. Cross said he'd ruin my life. He even paid for my college admission under a fake donor's name. I didn't know what to do. Julie gripped his hand. You just did the right thing. A hush fell over the room. The screens behind the podium flickered, then came to life. First, a scanned medical record, Julie's terminal diagnosis. Then, side-by-side comparisons of the doctor's fake license and revoked credentials. A recording of Angela threatening Julie years ago. Photos of Mark and Angela leaving the motel together. And finally, a spreadsheet showing the path of stolen inheritance money through Darren Cross's network of shell companies. Gasps. Murmurs. A woman dropped her wine glass. Angela's face went pale. Mark grabbed her arm and bolted for the exit. But the press had already swarmed. Security blocked the doors. Julie stepped forward, pulling off her mask. Did you think I'd stay dead forever? Angela screamed. She's insane! She signed it all away! We did nothing wrong! Julie raised her voice. You forged my diagnosis. You faked my death. You erased me. Mark tried to take control. She's unstable. This is a setup. She was delusional before she disappeared. Then explain this, Julie snapped, holding up the original consent forms, one of which bore an obvious forged signature. You used a fake doctor to push me into a memory wipe. You stole my mother's legacy. You cashed in my life. Cross stepped off the stage, calm and composed. Miss Bennett, I suggest you be careful. Accusations like these can be expensive. I think the FBI will be covering those costs, said a voice from the back. 2 federal agents stepped into view. One held a warrant. The other, a briefcase full of evidence Julie had anonymously sent the week before. Panic erupted. Angela collapsed into a chair. Mark shouted for a lawyer. Cross remained still, his face carved in stone. But the storm had come. As the chaos unfolded, Julie turned to Ethan. I'm not angry at you. I just need to know. Did you ever suspect they'd hurt me? Ethan swallowed hard. I didn't think they would actually go through with it. I thought they just wanted you out of the picture for a while. Angela said it was your idea, that you needed to disappear. I didn't know what to believe. Julie looked away, her heart tightening. Maybe I did want out once. Later, after the gala burned into the headlines and arrests were made, Julie sat alone on a park bench with a final letter in her lap, courtesy of the nurse Claire, postmarked days earlier. Inside was another document, a second consent form. This one had no witness signatures, no dates. But it was typed in Julie's own handwriting, signed in her name. The implication was clear. Had she once orchestrated her own disappearance? Was the entire scheme truly her idea, hijacked by people she once trusted? Or had someone expertly manipulated her all along? Julie stared at the signature. Was it hers? She would never be certain. With the fortune reclaimed and her past unburied, Julie packed a single bag and left the town behind, again. But this time, on her terms. No more funerals, no more masks. No more ghosts. She vanished, this time for real. And somewhere, in a quiet cabin far from Betrayal, she started over. Alone, but finally free.